It is. Hey, how are
So
you?
good to see you. Yeah, I'm doing
It's
good. You
great
look
to see
great.
you. Thank you. Things have
Wow, y'all.
things have gone well. We're just,
Yeah.
I never thought you could do financial aid and scholarships from your house, but you can. It's working out fine.
So, are you at your house right now? You're not at all.
I'm at home. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This
How's
moment is gonna make us all rethink just what we can accomplish from home.
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
You all look so comfortable at home too. Maybe you should just switch over indefinitely.
Except for
Uh,
Albus, who will never go home.
yes,
I've never accomplished anything at home.
that's so funny.
All right.
Kaylin Sparks, I just want to say I'm proud of your daughter. She's
Thank
doing
you.
great. She had a great last year. It seems like so.
Yeah.
Congrats to her.
Thank you. Very excited about her being amongst these great students next year. So
Yeah. Officially a terrier. That's great.
yeah, we're definitely going to have empty nest here next year. So
Oh, you'll adjust. She'll
I
just be down the
know.
road.
I know. We will.
Yeah.
We will. So, but her 18th birthday is next week. So she's kind of, bummed out about that, but just because of not being able to do anything, but that's okay. We'll make up for it. It's all said and done.
We can think of something too.
All right.
Okay, back to you, Ramon.
Yeah, I think we're gonna we'll get started. I want to again thank everyone for for being here today. And I think since we have a good turnout, and so just a kind of a few things, you might have some questions as we're talking, and you could do one of two things. One is you could in the chat you could type in your question. And I will, as host, I will get to that. Or you could also just raise your hand or give a thumbs up. So I got my thumbs up going on there. So so please keep that in mind. And towards the end of this event, we'll open up the floor, and that'll be more of a time to address questions that you might have. Just to actually to take a step back, just to introduce myself, I'm Ramon Galeanes. I'm the director of undergraduate research and postgraduate fellowships, and it's my 9th year here at Wofford. Before that, I worked with the Bonner Scholars, and that was also my first time that I was able to engage with Donovan Hicks. So just, I want to give you a little bit of a background on Donovan Hicks. He is currently in year 1 at Stanford Law School. I believe he is the first terrier to go to Stanford Law, if I'm not mistaken. He went to Boiling Springs High School. He previously was a research associate for the Poverty to Prosperity program at the Center for American Progress. That's the largest progressive think tank in the country, where he worked, where his work focused on the intersection of racial equity and public benefits. He has been quoted in The Guardian, Newsweek, and published in Real Clear Policy, Talk Poverty, Truth Out, and Blavity. Before joining the Center for American Progress, Donovan worked at Deloitte Federal Consulting and the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality. In 2019, Donovan received his Master of Philosophy in Sociology from Trinity College, Dublin, as one of 2 National Mitchell Scholars, the first in terrier history. In 2016, he graduated magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from Wofford, receiving degrees in government and finance. As a junior, he was named a Truman Scholar, becoming the first in 25 years and the 6th in terrier history. And as a sophomore, Donovan was elected to serve as student vice president. So that is, I think this is a very, lots of accomplishments and accolades. And, it's a great honor to welcome you back to Wofford virtually. This is your home, and so we're all glad you're back. You're here with us. I do want to also mention that Donovan will be back physically next academic year. So please keep that in mind. Can everyone hear me okay, or? Okay, so if there's any connectivity issues, just if you could put it in the chat, and I will try to adjust as I go along. Donovan, you received the Truman Scholarship as well as the Mitchell Scholarship. Would you please discuss why you applied to these fellowships and how these opportunities shaped your post-Wofford experience and development?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me here. If I'm squinting, it's because I'm just trying to avoid the sun. But we have a lot of sun in California, so that's great. I'm happy to do this, and I'm always happy to help Wofford students. And that introduction just makes me sound so much more cooler than I actually am. Truth is, I just kind of applied to a bunch of stuff, and Dr. Alvis wrote so many recommendations that enough stuff stuck. And so I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the people on this call just supporting me and writing recommendations and just helping me out, really and truly. That's really how anyone become successful in any capacity. So really not about me, but I'm happy to chat as much as I can. And so please ask questions so I don't talk for an hour. I really don't like listening to myself talk, and I also really don't like seeing my reflection in this Zoom. So it's a new age for all of us. But so Truman and Mitchell, and there's also two prefaces I want to make before I talk about any of the stuff I did. One is, I would hate for anyone to leave this call and to think that you have to do what I did to get to where I've got. That's just not true. Certainly one path I took was necessary, but not sufficient. And that's an LSAT joke for any of the people currently studying. But this is just one path. So please take this with a grain of salt and try to figure out what you care about in life. And that's always the key to really being successful. And then two is, and we'll talk about law school later, is that really don't want anyone to leave this and think that you have to, move across the country to get a great legal education. That's certainly not the case. I'll talk about why I did, but you don't have to do that. So really just, hopefully just hear my story with a grain of salt and just apply it to your own life. But yeah, to talk about Mitchell and Truman specifically, obviously I was fortunate enough to win Truman first, and I was a junior, as Ramon said. And I really think Truman is a fantastic opportunity. So unfortunately, if you're a senior, you sort of missed the deadline for that. But if you are a rising junior, you should really think about this. And or if you know people that are younger, you should encourage them to apply. It's a fantastic scholarship, and I heard about it only really by happenstance. I went to this conference my sophomore year, and they were talking about all this public service stuff, and I really didn't have any idea what public service was. I went to high school, as Ramon said, down the road, and I came to Wofford afterwards, and really knew I had this sense of I wanted to do community service, but didn't know what public service was. Once I heard about it, I thought that it would be a great idea for me. And it's really a scholarship that's committed to sort of producing public servants, and that just means that people who are willing to dedicate majority of their career to nonprofit work or NGO work. And it's a fantastic opportunity. They basically try to choose one person per state. South Carolina is unfortunately not big enough to have two people per state. And it's a multi-round competition. And you write an essay sort of detailing why you care about public service, and then more importantly, a policy proposal, which is like an original idea that you might have to cure a problem. And I'll never forget, at that point, Dean Maltsby and Dean Weisberg were still here, Wiseman. And a lot of you remember them. They're no longer at Wofford anymore, but I sort of walked in and I said, hey, I want to apply for this Truman scholarship. And, she sort of was like, oh, well, we really haven't had anybody to win. And so, thanks, but, no thanks. And, it's a lot of work. So let me know if you're willing to do it. But long story short, she was immensely helpful for me. And that's what Ramon and Dr. Ware and a lot of these people on this call serve in the capacity now to be helpful for you all. And so long story short, there was a huge experience for me. I met so many like-minded people who've become some of my closest friends today. and really have inspired me to keep pushing in my professional career. And then after Wofford, I sort of wasn't sick of applying for things. I hit up Dr. Elvis and Ramon and a lot of other people again to sort of help me in this pursuit. For Mitchell, I sort of had wanted to travel, and I knew of these postgrad opportunities that allowed you to sort of study, get a master's for free, but also sort of have this year of self-exploration. And, people had spoken tremendously of it. I was particularly attracted to Mitchell because of the programs that were available at Trinity, which is the school that I studied at in Dublin. But there's others out there, Rose and Marshall and Gates Cambridge and Fulbright. So that one just seemed to be the best fit for me. But, these scholarships have just really changed my life in a lot of ways, both personally and professionally. And I just cannot recommend them highly enough if you're a person that, either cares about public service or just wants this cool year to sort of travel and think about an issue. I just think they're sort of irreplaceable as an opportunity.
Donovan.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Did you hear the end of that? Did I break up, or it's back to you?
You go ahead. I mean, I'll just let me know when I'll segue to the next section whenever you're ready.
Yeah, no, that was all I had to say about Truman and Mitchell. So unless you have any follow up.
Sure. No. Thank you, Donovan. I just want to mention a few things very quickly. I also am a firm believer in the transformative power of postgraduate fellowships. I received a Gates Cambridge Scholarship to study at University of Cambridge. I applied to that when I was a senior in college. And then later on, I also received a David L. Boren Fellowship to study in Angola, right? And so for me, both of those experiences just open up a world of opportunities, right? And so, I want all of you to kind of to consider those opportunities. Last year, I work as part of a larger. I work with the committee. John Ware is a member of that committee. So is Sissy Fowler, Kara Bopp, and Kirsten Crick-Agner is a member of that committee. Last year, we had a number of students who have applied to Fulbright. They've applied to Rhodes. They applied to Truman. They applied to Gates Cambridge. So I would, please consider these opportunities, and I'd be happy to discuss them more with you one-on-one at some point after this event. And you could, I'll follow up with an email. So if you're interested, you could get in contact with me. But I'd like to segue to the section regarding law school because this is the Pre-Law Society. Donovan, would you tell us a little bit about what law school is like for during your first year? What and again, this is a unique year too, given the pandemic, things that are happening. But how would you describe your first year at law school?
Yeah. So law school is a heck of an experience, and I'll be the first to say that I've really enjoyed my law school experience. I think you probably hear a lot of people who maybe didn't enjoy their law school experience or will say the law school is awful. And I think if you ever hear someone say that, you should ask them a couple follow-up questions. One is, did you really know what a lawyer was, about, like the day-to-day? And then two is, did you do well in law school? Did you figure out how to do well in law school? And I guarantee you that the answers to both of those questions will be no if they didn't enjoy law school. And so I think there is a lot of value in taking some time before you go to law school. A lot of people from Wofford go straight through, and that's fine. Some of them, really know that that's what they want to do. I think a lot of them maybe don't I think there's, the average age now is about 24. So I took 3 years off before coming to law school. And that was really, really helpful to me in terms of understanding that this is what I wanted to do. I was wanting to spend the money, the time, the effort. It's very, very important. So I really recommend kind of doing a job, doing something in between Wofford and law school, if that's what you desire. I think it'll give you a lot more perspective. And I do think that people who are a little bit older tend to do better. But 1L has been great. Ramon said this is a weird year. I honestly think we might have had the easiest 1L in all of history because here at Stanford and many other schools, we've decided to waive grades in light of the coronavirus. So most schools are operating on one semester of grades. And it's really interesting to kind of go to class and know that it really doesn't matter how you do on the exam, but you'll kind of pass. So that won't be your experience, but I think law school is just a different way of thinking. And I think all the classes that I took as a government major with Dr. Alvis and Tamara and Farron he's not there anymore, and Vanderbilt and all these other people really helped me. I think you really have to be able to write clearly and think clearly. But in law school, you're learning how to write and think a different kind of way. And that is in a legal way. And so flowery language is discouraged. Short and choppy sentences are encouraged. And really, your opinion is very much less important than whatever the doctrine is. And of course, as you all know, we follow precedent in the legal system. And so stare decisis really rings true. So it's just a question of, learning how to talk and think in a different kind of way. But I think it's a lot of fun. I think if you're a person that likes to, think deeply about positions, you're a person that likes to convince other people of your positions, if you're a person that likes to research and write, if you're a person that likes to question things constantly, I think law school's for you. And, you really shouldn't doubt that. So if there's anything I've taken away is that I'm glad that I went to law school, and really don't regret that at all. It's been an amazing experience so far. Oh, and then we get a question from Dr. Alvis. What's a day in the life of a law student? Okay, so it's a good question. So your 1L year is all doctrinal, and what that means is there's a certain basis, basic black letter law classes that all lawyers have to know. You don't need to know them now, but there's civil procedure, contract, torts, criminal law, constitutional law, which some of you are in, Dr. Elvis, so you should pay attention, and other things like that. And you will spend your 1L taking those courses and not a lot less electives. Depending on the law school, you'll have a couple more choices, but really 1L is about doctrinals. And it's no different than college than you are now. You will go for an hour and a half, an hour. And the Socratic Method is alive and well. And so what that means is, maybe a little bit different from Wofford is the professor will, rather than stand and lecture for an hour and a half, will cold call on students, either individually or there'll be a panel of students that were prepared to go that day, and sort of actually probing questions about the cases, and ask you, hypotheticals about if we change this fact, if we change this circumstance, how will it affect the holding of the case? That's really what 1L is really designed for you to do, is sort of, can you know the cases so well that you can spin them on their head and, reason about whether there would be a different conclusion. To give you an example of this, so I took con law this year with Pam Carlin. Some of you got to know Pam Carlin because she was on Trump's impeachment hearing. She's a somewhat divisive figure, but also a brilliant scholar here. And, what we would do is she would, some of her favorite cases, is Minor v. Happersett. And Minor v. Happersett is a case in the 19th century that basically said that women weren't allowed the right to vote. The Constitution did not confer that on them. And so her whole take on some of constitutional law is that what do you do to change the outcome of minor haversack? Of course, history tells us that they passed the 19th Amendment, which formally gave women the right to vote, right? And so there's these questions about constitutional law that, sometimes it's not necessarily a case that you need to change the outcome of precedent. Maybe you just need to motivate political will to change the outcome of the case. Of course, we haven't passed an amendment in a long time, so that's kind of a stretch. But it's interesting things to think about. So that's what a day in the life, and you have office hours, and you spend your time reading cases and prepping for class, and ultimately to take one exam at the end.
I have another question, Donovan. What do you know now that you wish you had known when you were applying to law school, a year or 2 years ago?
Yeah. So I got a question also about the LSAT. So I'll try to weave that into this answer. Is that the LSAT is, it's a lot of pomp and circumstance surrounding the test. One thing I think is a key myth to debunk is that the LSAT is completely a learnable and beatable test. And that is something that I didn't know when I was a junior, certainly when I was a senior at Wofford. And I had a lot of insecurities about the test. I'm not really that great of a test taker. I get a lot of performance anxiety. That's just really not where I think a lot of my strengths are. So I had a lot of anxiety about the test, and I had taken a diagnostic test and did terrible. So I think that's important to know. I know that now. I wish I would have known that then. Is that if you've taken a cold LSAT test and you didn't do well, don't be discouraged. There's some people who can sit down and take that LSAT cold and will score very well, and unfortunately, that's not most people. Don't take that as anything more than just sort of initial marker. I studied for the LSAT for about 6 months, and I think that's about average. I think you should be prepared to dedicate that kind of time to the LSAT. And I think you should just prepare yourself to kind of have a lot of highs and lows. There were days that I thought I did well, and there was other days that I missed crazy things. And so, the LSAT is annoying, but it is beatable. And over time, you will learn to think as the LSAT creators have. You start to be able to predict what the right answer is and really start to suspect what the wrong answer is. And so really don't get discouraged on yourself. Really give yourself time. And don't, I didn't take the LSAT during college, and I really recommend that. I mean, I think it's, your junior, senior year of Wofford. I had a lot of fun. I don't know that I would want to hamper that fun with studying for the LSAT. I think maybe wait until after you're starting to work a job and give yourself plenty of time to dedicate to the test. So don't get discouraged. You can do well. And, I did, by the time I took the test, I did incredibly well and did much better than I even thought. So you just, just be patient with yourself.
I have some additional questions, but but before I continue with my questions, I'd like to see if anyone has a question for Donovan. You could either type it in, if you just want to ask, and if you would just want to ask, if you could kind of just hit the thumbs up button and then just unmute yourself, and then, and if you do that as well, if you could just kind of just state your name too, and saying, I'm a junior at Wofford, or, give everyone an opportunity now to, so I'll unmute you, Hugo. Let's see.
Hey,
okay.
Hey Donovan, it's Hugo.
Hey Hugo, it's good to see you again.
So you spoke briefly about what your first year at Stanford was like. How would you compare your time so far in law school with your master's program in Dublin?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hugo. I think they're very different. If you do a master's program, it's, you're writing a dissertation or a thesis, and a lot of your professors have written those themselves. And so it's just a lot of reading and preparing somewhat of an original argument and a lot of editing, and so on and so forth. I think there are some ways that it helps you in your legal field. I think it helps you hone in on what you want to do, right? So I think if you're a person that like, I care about immigration law, it might not be a bad idea to go get an immigration master's. And then when you can come to law school, you can take a lot of classes specific to that topic, and you'll know a lot more than the students that are there. And, you know, things like sociology or social sciences more broadly do inform the law in a lot of ways. Sometimes they're insidious, sometimes they're more overt, but certainly they inform the law. I mean, you think Brown v. Board of Education really is the seminal case that we all know. The case hinges on a psychology study about dolls. So there are moments in, you know, sort of legal history that really are informed by other social sciences. So I think if you kind of have an inkling of what you want to do, it might not be a bad idea to do that master's, and it might help you out.
Thank you.
Yep. I think there was another question, Ramon, I'll just respond to briefly, is how is being a lawyer going to help you achieve your life goals, which seems to be in your community. You know, I think a lawyer can achieve whatever goal you want them to achieve. Some people go to law school because, you know, they want to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some people go to law school because, you know, they care about, you know, representing their grandma and her probate case, or someone in the family child court case, and that's just as commendable. And then some people go to law school because they think it's going to help them run for office or some quest for political power. I think all those are fine ways to think about law school. They're certainly not all the ways. And, you know, I definitely want to be a lawyer. Pretty committed to that. There's some people who come to law school and don't want to be a lawyer at all. Just want to sort of learn how to think about the law. I have a lot of personal opinions about that. But, you know, certainly if you're in that position, there's nothing wrong with that. Sort of use the law degree as a thought experiment. I think you'll get a lot more if you just sort of really think about if you want to be a lawyer. And there's something like righteous, and there's something amazing about, you know, going into a court and saying that you're counsel for whatever party, that you're officer of the court. I think that's a lot of responsibility, and I think it's just like a pretty amazing position to be. So, yeah.
Other questions? You want to? Okay, let me double check. All right, I'll unmute you.
Hello again. So as you know, you are surrounded by some of the best and brightest young people in America there in Stanford. Do you see a common thread through the people you've interacted with, or is there like a common identity of the Stanford students that sets them apart from others?
Okay, good question. You know, I'll tell you this funny story. So my first quarter here, we are separated into sections. There's 180 people always at Stanford Law. Maybe some of you know that. Our compatriots at Harvard and Yale. Harvard's much bigger. There's about 600, and Yale there's about 200. But I think Stanford retains the title of being the smallest in the T14. But we're in sections of 30, and they try to do a good job of making the sections diverse and whatever. So anyways, I have this guy who comes over to me, and he's a guy who went to Exeter High School, which is a private boarding school. If some of you don't know about it, he went on to Yale, and then he did a master's at Sciences Po in France. And he comes to me and he goes, you know, Donovan, I was looking up, you know, your school the other day. I was like, I didn't tell him where I went to college, so kind of creepy for him to come to me and say that. And he goes, you know, it seems like a little quaint school, you know? And I was like, okay, this is gonna be something. And he goes, you know, well, you must be like the first person from your college. I never heard of it. You know, is it difficult there? Sort of these series of very condescending questions. He goes on to try to lecture me about, you know, civil rights poetry. So he asked me this ridiculous question, which is, you know, have you ever heard of Langston Hughes? And I say, oh my God, this guy is just a real piece of work. And of course I say yes. And he goes, you know, well, you know, his most famous work is, he starts mansplaining to me Langston Hughes' most famous work is, and talks about these four rivers. And I said, actually, his most famous work is I Too Am America. And, I sort of give him a lecture back. Anyways, I tell you this story because I think what separates anybody is, it's not these schools that you go to. It's not, who your mom and dad are, whatever these weak signals that people use to sort of signify their intelligence. I think it's how much belief do you have in yourself, and how much do you care about what you're doing? And, you shouldn't spend your time thinking about whether someone thinks that they're better than you because they haven't heard, Wofford or whatever these ridiculous things are. And I think people who make it here are people who just have this sort of probably unhealthy level of, self-confidence. And it doesn't matter if it's real or not, but it just needs to be based on something. And, I think that's what's kept me going. There's a lot of people who made those like really, ridiculous claims for me, but I just try to remember, whose I am. And, my parents taught me how to be just respectful and work really hard in life. And I try not to worry about all the smoke and screen about what other people have done to get here. But I think if there's one advice, is just, believe in yourself and work really hard. And when buttholes like that come across your way, give them a little lesson, and then they'll stop bugging you.
Thank you, Donovan. By the way, Donovan and I and some other students, we went to Busboys and Poets when we were in DC back a number of years ago. That was a very interesting trip. I think some of us were a little bit late for that trip, but that was a great trip. I'm one question I have. And I think other folks will have this too. What about in terms of scholarships, right? Stanford sounds very expensive. Are there scholarships out there? What do you recommend, or what should what should we keep in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. How are you going to pay for all of this? And it's such a price tag for law school. I think it brings up a larger point that I wanted to hit on, is that a lot of my friends who graduated me at Wofford went on the University of South Carolina, Wake Forest, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, UGA, some Emory, and maybe even some Duke. And I think a principal reason why they chose to do that was because, to put things in layman's terms, cheaper, and they got a lot of financial aid to go to those schools. And I think those schools are a little bit more accessible. It doesn't require a big move. And so, I think that's a perfectly fine and rational and great way to think about law school, is the debt and how you're going to pay it back. And I think that's what determines whether people apply to sort of like a T14 school or a regional school. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think you should have a personal conversation with yourself and your family about, sort of what you can afford, and how realistic you want to, how realistic it is that you want to pay back this debt. And there's, I think that's a great way. I think University of South Carolina, Columbia, from what I understand, and some of the other schools are just a little bit more gracious than some of these bigger schools. Of course, at Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, they're sort of known for not waiving their application fee, and then sort of like not really giving any merit-based aid. So, it's kind of like, if you're good enough to get in, you're good enough to pay for it, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. But, I sort of had a conversation with my family. I was okay to sort of take on this debt. That certainly is not the case for everyone. And so it's okay if you sort of realize that, you're not in that position. I think on the flip side, if you are in the position and you're okay to sort of think about the debt, there's a lot of ways you can pay it off. There's the LRAP program, which means that you go and you work in public interest for 10 years and the federal government will forgive your loan. That's one option that a lot of people do. Another option is that you go work in big law, which is, kind of infamous in and of itself. But you go work for these big law firms, they pay you a lot of money to work a lot of hours, and, you'll pay it off in maybe 2 to 3 years, depending on how good you are at managing your money. So that's certainly what I probably will have to do. I'm going to be happy about it because, I like a check, and I haven't had a check in a long time. But, to be serious, I think it's perfectly reasonable to to pay it off if you go that route. And it's a lot easier to get those jobs, I think, the better law school that you go to. Not impossible if you go to sort of a regional school, but a lot easier if you go to a better school.
Other questions? Okay. Well, let's see. I'll go to Ashlyn, and then Dr. Alvis has a question as well.
Okay. Hi, Donovan. I'm Ashlyn. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I'm a junior gov major at Wofford. And I had a question. You said that you would recommend, or you personally took a few years off before going to law school. That's the track I'm wanting to go to or go on as well. If you don't want to travel, you want to work, what job would you say you should try to do that would be beneficial before going to law school, would you say?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad to hear that you want to take some time, so good for you. And if your parents have a heart attack, you can tell that I said you should. And that's a personal component, because a lot of parents just kind of freak out. You need to go get a degree, and it's like, chill out. But I would say there's no right job, right? There's just no right one. And so anyone who's telling you, you got to go work on the hill, or you got to go, get this great job. I mean, I think from the point of view of law school, they don't give a flying flip where you go do. You can mow grass for a year if you can make it sound interesting. They really care about, your GPA, your LSAT, your recommendation, those sort of other things. I don't think, they're going to do, but, on the flip side though, if you do want to sort of shoot for a job that you think might be professionally suitable for you, it might be a good thing, because you can get a letter of recommendation out of that. And then, I'm not going to say that the person who goes to work for, I don't know, Senator Graham or Senator Scott, doesn't have not going to get some bonus points when they apply to school if they can get one of the senators to write them a letter of recommendation. I think that probably does carry some weight, but certainly not necessary. And I would think in terms of letter recommendations, I strongly recommend that you get 2 professors to write your recommendation and have one to be a job, because I think law school cares about, it's an academic setting. I think it goes far further if you have a professor comment on your work ethic and sort of prowess than places to work. So do something you want to do something fun. I went to DC because I wanted to live there for a while, but you don't need to do that. If you want to do that, great. Don't want to do that, that's just fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Dr. McQuiston, go ahead.
I just had something that I wanted to add to that, Ashlyn. That was a great question. And I hear that quite often from students as well. And Dr. Alvis probably does too. And I want to second what Donovan just said, because what we tend to hear from law schools, from admissions counselors at law schools when they come to Wofford and talk to students, is it doesn't matter what you do. Do not feel like, well, if I want to go to law school, then I need to spend my summers working at a law firm. And if I want to take some time off before applying to law school, then I need to do some job related to the law. Absolutely not. And I know John Fort feels this way too. If you happen to talk to him, what law schools want are well-rounded students. They want students who have done interesting things and who are interested in lots of things. And so do not be shy about spending that time off between Wofford and law school, doing literally anything you want, and then telling them about it in your application. So if you want to go, I think it's John Fort who has said, if you want to go be a bartender somewhere and work on, live on the beach and be a bartender, do that. And then tell in your law school application, tell them why you decided to do that. So I just really wanted to second what Donovan said and let you know that law school admissions people have in fact said those things to us. So that was a great question, and I wanted everyone here, all the students, to know that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to let Dr. Alvis go. I have another question regarding DC and jobs, but I'll wait for Dr. Alvis to talk.
Yeah, Donovan, one thing I wanted to ask, just kind of following up on what Dr. McQuiston said, in terms of doing interesting things, right, in preparation for applying to law school, even though not all of us are applying to Stanford, right? I mean, having interesting things on your resume, right, I imagine helps in any place that you're applying for, especially if you're looking for funding. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, what have you learned from other students at Stanford about, really interesting things to do that help you to stand out and distinguish yourself? And I want to ask that in two ways. One is, when you were here, you had to exercise a lot of initiative in finding things to apply for, especially paths that had never been taken by other students before. And so I wanted to ask your advice for students. What are interesting things that people at Stanford have done that our students here can think about? And then I was also going to ask you to comment on what could we as faculty be doing to facilitate our students being able to have some of the opportunities and some of the accomplishments that other students that you see at Stanford have.
Yeah, great questions, Dr. Alvis. Yeah, I'm happy to provide more specificity. And Dr. Alvis is right. Like, when I was doing some of this, nobody was like, so, it was weird for me. I mean, it was strange. No one knew. And it, like I said, I took a lot of shots in the dark and they worked out. And so you should feel, I think anything to take from my story is like, just do what you want to do and, worry about how you'll make it sound pretty in an application later. But, to give you a couple examples. So, my roommate here, before he got to law school, he did a Fulbright in South Korea, also worked at consulting with me at Deloitte, which is a reason why you should always be nice to people. You never know where you might end up with them. No idea that he was applying to law school. We ended up in the same class. But yeah, he did a Fulbright in South Korea, and that was an amazing experience for him. My other roommate did TSA for 2 years in Memphis before coming to law school. That's a popular path to do. Another one of my friends worked on a cattle ranch in Colorado for a year and a half, and that was, fantastic opportunity for him. I think people's experiences run the gamut. Some people do masters and, before coming, like me, it really just depends on you. And and I think the importance shouldn't be really what you do, as we said, but like how you tell the story. And so really, I think that's how faculty can really help students is helping students craft that story. I don't know if Dr. Ware is still on, and there's a lot of people who have helped me in my writing, but I think Dr. Ware is an amazing, amazing editor. I just have to give shout outs to him. He would go through my application and pose these questions, and I was like, did you think about this? I was like, no, I didn't think about it. But it really helped me just sort of figure out what my story was and how to tell it in a compelling way. And I think sometimes there's a dissonance because students are very cool and do great things. And I know Wofford students are just the coolest students and just are really interesting, just a nature of going to Wofford. But they don't always know how to communicate that in a way that is going to be compelling to an admissions committee. And so I think you should spend a lot of time writing your personal statement. So many law students I know spend 80% of their time working on the LSAT and then 20% writing a personal statement. And I really don't think that's the balance that you should strike. I think you should work on the LSAT, obviously get the best score you can, but really don't shaft the personal statement. Really take the time. I went through about 10 drafts of my personal statement before I thought it was good enough to submit. And the greatest test I ever heard for editing a personal statement was this, is that no one should be able to write any sentence of your personal statement. And that's a really good test. So that is to say, if anyone could write a sentence that is identical to your sentence, then you haven't done enough editing. It should be that personal, that specific, that authentic, that no one should be able to copy it. So hopefully that's helpful, and I'm happy to follow up with more questions specifically. But you know, I really think that's what I use as a guiding post. And then I think, and then Dr. Hall said, how much did taking common law at Wofford save you in adjusting to law school at Stanford? You know, I think, you know, I'm gonna shrug Dr. Elvis's ego. No, I think common law is.
I'm trying to write a compelling personal statement for myself.
No, you're. I think, Dr. I don't know if it was common law or what, but the rhetorical presidency was that your common law class? Or, I think I've quoted that book in so many personal statements of my own that you know, it's proven well. But I think yeah, I think, you know, the things you learn at Wofford are very, very helpful. I mean, themes of federalism, things of judicial review, judicial power, judicial activism, all of those themes, you know, you will use in law school, undoubtedly, especially in constitutional law. So really, like I said, I think pay attention, and you know, and I think that stuff helps you out. I mean, I think, you know, obviously we read Marbury v. Madison so much, but I think if you can come into law school and have a really good take on that foundational case, I mean, you're just gonna be ahead of the game in sort of how you think about constitutional law, and how do you apply it going forward. So, Dr. Avis, you're doing something right. We'll keep you employed.
Donovan, I wanted to, I know Ashlyn brought up the question of jobs before law school, and piggybacking off of that, you've had some really cool jobs in Washington, D.C., Deloitte, the Center for American Progress. Tell us a little bit more about how you were able to get those positions, or what advice you might have for students who might be looking to go to DC down the road.
Yeah, great question. You know, and like I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning, that I'm really not that smart. I just want everyone to understand. I'm really not that smart, and I'm really also not that, you know, brilliant. I think, you know, I've just been successful in life by being incredibly tenacious about what the things are that I want, the things that I think I'm passionate about, the things I care about. So for me, those things that, you know, I really care about Black people. You know, my parents didn't go to college. I grew up pretty low income, and it was really hard for me to watch my parents struggle to help me and my brother get through college. Unfortunately, my brother didn't make it to the end of college, but, you know, my parents worked really hard, 12, 13-hour days in manufacturing, and then were sort of cast aside, you know, because they were up in age and didn't have any skills. And so once globalization hit and, you know, manufacturing for like CDs wasn't necessary, my parents were laid off. And so that really upset me. And I, you know, wanted to, you know, I wanted to do something that showed that I care about poverty and sort of economic justice issues. And so I sought out jobs that had to do with poverty and economic justice. And then I found some people whose bios I really liked, who I thought were inspiring, and then I hit those people up. And I think I met with Hugo in DC about this, but you know, FaceTime, especially in DC, I think goes a long way. You know, send an email, get a coffee with someone, and really do your work, do your homework to show that you've studied up. You know, and so when I met with people, it wasn't just like, you know, hey, I care about this issue. Well, you know, their response is going to be like you and every other person. So how do you differentiate yourself? Well, you study and you say, well, look, when I met with people, I said, well, I knew how much important the fight for raising the minimum wage was. And I knew who were the players in DC who were doing that. And I had read their report, you know, for the last 2 or 3 years. And I had a take on it. I had an opinion about it. And I think that matters to people. And so it's not really about having the best grades or being the smartest. It's about doing your homework when you meet with people, and having, you know, an interesting take, you know, showing them that you're a hard worker. That's really what goes. And I think reputation matters. And so once I got that first job, you know, people were willing to vouch for me in other jobs. And then it led to another job and another job, so much so that this past summer, I worked on the presidential campaign. I worked on Beto's campaign. And, you know, God knows I didn't deserve that job. But what happened was, I'd worked for enough people, and then they knew someone who was basically running his policy team on his campaign, and they needed someone who was young, and I was the name that they thought of. So, a lot of this stuff is chance and luck, but a lot of it also is just doing the hard work, going the extra mile. I really think that makes a difference. So really think about what makes you mad. Really think about what gets you up in the morning. It doesn't have to be anything with politics and public policy. We have enough people who think they are endowed with a great sense of importance in that. But it can be anything else. And really just go after it and study.
I know Jake has a question as well.
Sure.
Hey, what's up, Donovan? I'm Jake. I'm a junior.
Hey,
so my
Jake.
question is, like, in that application process and then going into your 1 hour year of Stanford, what were like your biggest struggles, and then what did you do to counteract those struggles?
Yeah, good question. Biggest struggle is that I just didn't really know how to study, and from a legal point of view, I mean, it's a different kind of study, and sort of just didn't understand, all these people were talking about these outlines and like all of them. What is that? So a lot of this is, some people are just off to a better start. They have a mom and dad who was a lawyer, so they kind of get all the jargon. I struggle with that to sort of get up to speed. But one thing I've done to try to help that is, and this is something that you wouldn't apply until you get into law school, but just really being extremely prepared. I think the more that you treat law school like a job, that is to say that you get up and you sort of work nonstop until about 6 or 7, I think the more successful you will be. And the more that you sort of just don't go to class and learn and sort of go back to your room and, because that's what we do at Wofford, right? You sort of learn and kind of go. The more you can go to class and reflect and start to outline. And that means that you can start to think about how the material might be applied to sort of a hypothetical, which is ultimately what you're going to be tested on in law school, the better you're going to be able to do. So like, don't go to class and just learn, I don't know, take a really important case, take, Hillary DC, which is the case that said that the Second Amendment was applied to all the states that gave everyone the right to bear, an individual right to bear arms. You want to think about, well, how could Hillary DC be applied to another law in another state that hasn't happened? Say California passes a law that says, during the time of COVID, we're going to take everyone's guns because we don't believe that in the time of quarantine, you should be able to have the right to it. Right. And so you want to think about, all right, how does Heller as precedent apply to that kind of thing? So trying to do more to engage, that's really helped me a lot more. I know Professor McQuiston.
Yeah, Dr. McQuiston, go ahead.
Let me get my video going. I just wanted to add to something that Donovan said that I thought was so good, which is to be able to convey in your law school application specifically, but of course more generally, what you're passionate about is perhaps the name of the game here. You got to care about something. In my career as a professor, not just at Wofford, but where I was previously, I meet a lot of students who don't seem to be passionate about things in this world. And you're going to have a tough time moving forward if that's you. And so I also think that the taking time off between Wofford and applying to law school can also be spent reflecting on what kinds of things you care about in this world, what kinds of causes you care about in this world. And, Donovan talking about his background and those things with his parents and economically, and that is the way that Donovan grew up. And so it was just inherent in him for those issues to be present in his life. But I just think that it's really important to do some self-reflection and think about what you are passionate about in this world, and convey that also when you're thinking about applying to law school.
Yeah, and just quickly, I think, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I just want to quickly underscore that. I think it's really good. One thing, I think the video might be slow, but hopefully you can hear me,
Mm-hmm.
is, one thing I did as a test is like, you spend so much time with your friends, really, really take time to think about like, what are those conversations that your friends are talking about that you kind of get proud of about, and I think that's a great test, like whatever you do with your friends, and it can be anything. Hopefully you're talking to your friends about a lot of things. I think you probably are in college,
Mm-hmm.
but use that, what is that thing that like, they say something, you're like, that's just ridiculous, that's a good sign. That's a really good sign that that's something that you care about more than anything. In my friend group in college, I was probably the only one who cared about politics. My friend group, like, they just did not care, and really would get annoyed with me when I was like talking. But that was something that I used. So maybe use that as a marker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to, Donovan, so if anyone has, we have time maybe for just one last question, but otherwise I was just going to, just thank everyone for participating, especially Donovan. Any last questions we want to ask? All right, Donovan, we are grateful that you've joined us virtually today. We are also thrilled that we're working on when you'll be able to come back during the next academic year. It would be great if it could, maybe September or October, but we'll, and I'm sure the Pre-Law Society will be excited to see you in person when you get back to campus. Would it be okay, and I hope this is okay with Jake and Dr. Alvis and Dr. McQuiston as well, I would like to, maybe you could, I'd like to, contact the students who are here today just to thank them. And Donovan, would it be okay if I shared your contact information if they have some additional questions for you? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Please, give them my email, and some of them have my phone number, so I'm happy if folks want to shoot me a text either. And if I could just say a last thing, I just want to say that, thank you all so much for coming, and, the professors on this call, I have just so much respect for and really care for, and I'm so indebted to in so many ways, including Dean Bigger. But one thing I'll say is, is I just want Wofford students to really know how great and wonderful they are. And, what I've done is not unique. There's so many other examples of Wofford students who just really try to do their best in their career. So, the world needs all of you to do well and to fight for something and to care about something. And, I just think this time is just so important for young leaders and young people who are passionate about things to care. And they don't have to be my politics. I could care less if you're a Republican or Democrat, but I do care about is for people to have an opinion and to fight for something they believe in. So if there's anything I just want you to say from my story, it's just, I'm just trying to do that for the things I think are right. And, hopefully I just want you all to do that for the things you think are right. But just do get in the fight and do try, because I think it's just, you all are just so talented. So that'll be my final word.
Thank you, Donovan. I appreciate it. Let's give him a round of applause here.
Thank you, Donovan.
All right. And again, thank you all. Again, thank you all for being here today. We'll follow up with an email, so you could contact me or Donovan if you have any additional questions.
And thank you to Ramon. Thank you for organizing this. This was excellent. Donovan, it was great to see you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Thank you, Ramon. Yes, fantastic.
Thanks, Donovan.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.